There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that act as doorways you don't realize you've passed through until you turn around and find the familiar landscape of your past has been irrevocably altered. They are rarely loud. They don't announce themselves with trumpets or thunder. They come in whispers, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the low light of a Tuesday night when the rest of the world has already gone to sleep. For me, that moment arrived on the worn, navy blue fabric of my couch, smelling faintly of old books and the rain that had been misting against the window panes all evening. It arrived in the form of a question, a proposition so absurd, so entirely out of character for the person speaking it, that my brain took a full 10 seconds to even process the words as English. Ethan, my best friend, my roommate, the unwavering North Star of my small, predictable universe, turned his head from the flickering credits of whatever mindless action movie we'd been half-watching. The blue and white light from the screen washed over his face, carving new shadows under his cheekbones, catching the sudden, unnerving intensity in his eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the cushions separating us. I hummed in response, my attention still snagged on the string of a composer's name, my mind a comfortable, hazy space of contentment. We did this often. It was our ritual, our shared language of silence and proximity that had defined our friendship for the better part of a decade. We existed together in spaces, filling them not with noise, but with a shared, steady presence. Then he spoke the words that shattered the quiet. "Let's make out for practice." I blinked. The name on the screen blurred. The orchestral scores swelling from the television speakers seemed to warp and distort, like a record slowing to a halt. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and the casual, almost joking expression I expected to find was completely absent. His face was a study in earnestness. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, not humor, not mischief, but a raw, unidentifiable need that was so potent it felt like a physical force. It was the look of a man standing on a ledge, asking if the ground below was as hard as it looked. It made the air in my lungs feel thin and useless. My heart, which had been beating a slow, contented rhythm against my ribs, suddenly kicked into a frantic, panicked gallop, a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. Practice. The word echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of my mind. It was an anchor, a potential life raft in the surging sea of confusion. A joke. It had to be a joke. But his eyes, dark and wide in the dim light, were not joking. And so I found myself on the other side of that doorway, the old room of our friendship behind me, and before me, a new, terrifying, and exhilarating space I had no map for. The only thing I knew for certain was that I had been secretly, hopelessly in love with him since we were 19, and my carefully constructed world of quiet observation and platonic safety was about to be burned to the ground. The most frightening part, the part that made my hands grow cold, was the desperate, traitorous piece of me that wanted to hand him the matches. I had spent years learning to live in the house of our friendship, respecting its walls, its boundaries, the carefully placed furniture of our platonic relationship. I had taught myself to admire the view from my window, his life, his girlfriends, his easy, sunlit path through the world, without ever trying to kick down the door that separated our rooms. And now, he was standing in the hallway, not knocking, but suggesting we dismantle the entire foundation just for practice. The shift had begun 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday that felt just as ordinary as any other until it wasn't. It began with the end of Ethan and Sarah. Their relationship had always been a fixture in the background of my life, with Ethan, a piece of furniture I had grown accustomed to navigating around. Sarah was nice enough, in a generic, non-threatening way. She was pretty, ambitious, and she loved Ethan, but I always felt she loved the idea of him more than the man himself. She loved the confident consultant who could command a boardroom, the charming athlete who had been a local hero in college. She didn't seem to see, or perhaps didn't care for, the Ethan I knew. The one who got lost in documentaries about deep-sea life, who had a crippling fear of disappointing his parents, who sometimes just needed to sit in silence and not have to be on. Their breakup, when it came, was less of a dramatic explosion and more of a slow, structural collapse. It was a death by 1,000 small disagreements, 100 unspoken resentments. He came home that night looking hollowed out. He didn't announce it. He just dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door with a clatter that sounded too loud, too final. He walked past me in the living room without his usual boisterous greeting and went straight to his room, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. That click was the first sign. Ethan never closed his door. Our apartment was a geography of open passages, a testament to the easy flow of our shared lives. A closed door was a border crossing, a declaration of separation we rarely, if ever, employed. I gave him an hour, my own anxiety a low hum beneath the surface of the book I was pretending to read. The silence from his room was heavy, suffocating. Finally, I got up, my stocking feet making no sound on the hardwood floor, and knocked gently on the wood. "Ethan." A muffled response, something that sounded like, "Yeah. You okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. The door opened a crack. He was standing there in the dark, his tie loosened, his shirt half unbuttoned. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed. "Sarah and I are done," he said, the words flat, devoid of emotion, like a news report about a distant tragedy. It wasn't a confession, it was a statement of fact. Then he did something that truly startled me. He stepped back, leaving the door ajar, an unspoken invitation into the newly drawn territory of his grief. I hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. The room was dark, save for the faint orange glow of the streetlights filtering through his blinds. He didn't turn on a light. He just walked over to his bed and sat down on the edge, his shoulders slumping forward as if the weight of his own frame was suddenly too much to bear. I didn't know what to do. The rule book for this situation, for comforting my best friend through a heartbreak I had, on some shameful, secret level, always wished for, didn't exist. So I did the only thing that felt natural. I sat down next to him, not touching, just sharing the space, the silence. We sat like that for what felt like hours, two statues in a darkened museum of his sorrow. He didn't cry. He just breathed, in and out, a slow, shuddering rhythm. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspy. "She said I'm distant, that I live in my own head, that I never let her all the way in." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "She said it's like there's a door inside me, and I always keep it locked." The irony was a physical blow. A door. He was describing the very architecture of my own feelings for him. The locked room where I kept my love hidden away. And Sarah had seen a similar structure in him. But I knew his door wasn't locked out of malice or a lack of love. It was locked out of fear. Ethan, for all his outward confidence, was terrified of being truly known. He presented a curated version of himself to the world, and to Sarah, because it was safer. Being fully seen meant risking full rejection, and he couldn't bear that. I knew this because I was the same. The difference was, with me, he seemed to leave the door unlocked. He might not have swung it wide open, but he never bolted it shut. I was the one person he didn't have to perform for. "She's not wrong," he murmured, staring at his hands. "But I don't know how to be any other way." "You don't have to be any other way with me," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. They hung in the air between us, simple and true. He turned his head and looked at me, and in the dim light, I saw the glint of tears finally gathering in his eyes. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was enough. It was the beginning of the shift, the first subtle tremor that would eventually lead to the earthquake on the couch. That night was the first time he asked me to stay. He was already in bed, under the covers, when I started to leave. His voice was small, almost childlike. "Leo, can you just stay for a bit?" He gestured vaguely to the armchair in the corner of his room. "Just until I fall asleep?" So I did. I sat in that chair, listening to the sound of his breathing slowly even out, deepening into the rhythm of sleep. It felt like standing guard, like being a lighthouse for a ship lost in a sudden, violent storm. It was the first of many nights. That first night in the armchair evolved, slowly and organically, into a new ritual. The pretense of the armchair was abandoned after a week. He had woken up from a nightmare, a choked gasp that had me by his bedside in an instant. He was trembling, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the waking world. I had sat on the edge of his bed, talking to him in a low, steady voice, telling him about my day, about a new photography project, anything to anchor him back to reality. He had clung to my hand like a drowning man, his grip surprisingly strong. When the shaking subsided, he didn't let go. He just shifted over, making space. "Just lie down," he'd whispered, his voice raw. "Please. The bed feels too big." And so I did. I lay down on top of the covers, stiff as a board, my heart hammering against my ribs, hyper-aware of the 6 inches of mattress separating our bodies. It was a chasm, a no-man's land fraught with 1,000 unspoken rules. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the tension began to leak out of me. His breathing, deep and regular beside me, became a strange sort of lullaby. The warmth radiating from his body was a comfort I hadn't realized I was starving for. I was a cartographer, and his proximity was a new, uncharted territory. I learned the topography of his sleep, the way his left leg would twitch just before he drifted off, the soft, almost inaudible whistle of air through his nose, the way he would sometimes murmur names from his work in a confused jumble. I learned that the warmth of another human body next to you could feel less like a temptation and more like a homecoming. This became our new normal. It was never discussed, never planned. It was simply a current we fell into. After a particularly grueling day at his consulting firm, or when the quiet of the apartment seemed to amplify his loneliness, he would just look at me with those tired, lost eyes, and I would understand. There was no explicit invitation. I would simply finish whatever I was doing, turn off the lights in the living room, and follow him to his bedroom. I would lie down on my side of the bed, and he on his, a respectful distance always maintained. We were 2 ships moored in the same harbor, close enough to feel the gentle pull of each other's presence, but never touching. For him, I told myself, it was about comfort. It was about not being alone in the dark. For me, it was a slow, exquisite torture. It was an exercise in monastic self-control. Every night, I would lie there, listening to him sleep, and wage a silent war with myself. One part of me, the pragmatic, self-preservationist part, screamed at me to run, to put a stop to this before my heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But the other part, the hopeful, foolish, deeply in love part, just wanted to soak in his presence, to steal these borrowed moments of intimacy, no matter the eventual cost. My camera became my only confidant. During the day, when Ethan was at work and the apartment was mine alone, I would retreat into my makeshift darkroom. The process of developing film was its own kind of ritual, a form of meditation. In the deep red glow, the world was reduced to shadows and light, to potential and reality. I found myself taking more and more photos of him, candid shots when he wasn't looking. Ethan laughing at something on his phone, the way the light from the window caught the gold flecks in his hair. Ethan asleep on the couch, his face unguarded, peaceful, the tension of his waking hours completely gone. Ethan at the kitchen counter, frowning in concentration as he tried to master a new recipe. I wasn't just documenting his life. I was trying to understand it, to capture the essence of him that he kept so carefully hidden. My photographs were my love letters, the ones I could never send. They were proof that I saw him, the real him, the man behind the locked door. Each image was a perfect, silent confession. The distance we maintained in his bed began to shrink, not through any conscious decision, but through the slow, inevitable creep of sleep. One night, I woke to find his arm thrown across my waist, his hand resting on my hip. My entire body went rigid. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my breath caught in my throat, every nerve ending screaming. His touch was a brand, a claim. It was unconscious, a simple, reflexive act of a sleeping man seeking warmth. But to me, it was everything. It was a breach of the unspoken treaty, and my traitorous body responded not with alarm, but with a deep, bone-weary sense of rightness. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just lay there, a prisoner of his casual, sleeping embrace, until the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds. When I finally, carefully, slipped out from under his arm, the place where he had touched me continued to burn. It started happening more frequently. We would fall asleep on our respective sides and wake up tangled together, my back pressed against his chest, his leg thrown over mine. The first few times, we would both jolt awake, mumbling apologies and scrambling back to our designated territories, a flush of awkwardness coloring the morning air. But soon, even that faded. We would wake up, acknowledge our proximity with a sleepy grunt, and simply untangle ourselves as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The line between friendship and something else was becoming so blurred it was barely visible. It was a watercolor painting left out in the rain, the colors bleeding into one another, creating a new, beautiful, and terrifyingly fragile picture. I was living in a state of suspended disbelief, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to wake up one morning and realize what was happening, to push me away and restore the old boundaries. But he never did. If anything, he seemed to lean into it. He initiated the closeness more and more. A hand on the small of my back as we passed in the kitchen, his head resting on my shoulder as we watched TV. Small, casual touches that sent bolts of lightning through my system. He was rewriting the rules of our relationship, and I was too terrified and too hopeful to ask for a copy of the new manuscript. I existed in a constant state of hyper-awareness, my senses perpetually dialed to 11 whenever he was near. I knew the exact sound of his footsteps on the floorboards, could distinguish his sigh of contentment from his sigh of exhaustion. I knew the scent of his shampoo, sandalwood and something vaguely citrusy, and how it clung to the pillows. I knew that the third button on his favorite flannel shirt was slightly looser than the others. My mind became an obsessive archive of Ethan-related data, each detail a precious, painful reminder of the chasm between what I wanted and what I had. He was an ocean, and I was living on the shore, content to study the tides, to collect the shells he washed up, too afraid to dive in for fear of the current, for fear of drowning. This nightly ritual, this shared sleep, was like wading in up to my waist. It was thrilling and dangerous, and I knew that a wave was coming that would either pull me under or carry me safely to the other side. I just didn't know which. This brings me back to the couch, to the flickering blue light, and the impossible proposition. Let's make out for practice. The words were still hanging in the air, a tangible thing. My mind, finally catching up to the present, started racing, searching for the logic, the reason, the escape hatch. Practice. Practice for what? Or more accurately, practice for who? Was there a new girl? Had he started dating again without telling me? Was I to be his training dummy, a safe space to work out the kinks before the real performance? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. The jealousy was so sharp, so immediate, it took my breath away. And yet, underneath the jealousy, underneath the hurt, a darker, more insidious thought took root. Even if it was for someone else, even if I was just a stand-in, a convenient tool, didn't I want to? Didn't a part of me, the part that had been starving for years, want to take whatever scrap he was offering, regardless of the context? What? I finally managed to say, my voice a croak. He didn't flinch. He just held my gaze, his own unwavering. Practice, he repeated, as if it were the simplest, most logical thing in the world. I'm out of practice. It's been a while, and I'm no good at it. I think I'm a bad kisser, he said it with a sudden, surprising vulnerability. The confident consultant was gone, replaced by an insecure boy. Sarah always said it didn't matter, but I think she meant it did. I don't know. I'm all in my head about it. All in his head. The phrase was a boomerang, flying back to him from that first night of his breakup. He was trying to fix the thing he thought was broken, and he was asking me to help him. The request was so fundamentally Ethan, to approach an emotional, intimate act like a problem to be solved, a skill to be mastered through practical application. He needed data. He needed a controlled experiment, and he had chosen me as his lab partner. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. You want me to help you practice kissing? I clarified, needing to hear the words in my own voice to make them real. He nodded, a jerky, nervous movement. Yeah, I mean, it's us, right? It's safe. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's just mechanics. Like learning a new software. He was talking faster now, the words tumbling out, a clumsy attempt to build a scaffolding of logic around a deeply illogical request. We can just try it, and you can give me notes. You know, like, too much tongue. Not enough, whatever. You're an artist. You're good at observation. Feedback. He was calling me an artist, appealing to the part of me that observed, that analyzed. He was framing it in a way he thought I would understand, in a way that stripped it of all emotional weight. He was building a fortress of plausible deniability around us, a place where this could happen without threatening the foundations of our friendship. It was brilliant, in its own clueless, terrified way. And it was also deeply, profoundly insulting. To be his science experiment. To have the one thing I had dreamed of for years reduced to a technical exercise. A part of me, the proud part, wanted to tell him to get lost. To tell him that my feelings weren't a training ground for his future conquests. But then I looked at his eyes, and the fear I saw there wasn't just about being a bad kisser. It was deeper than that. It was the fear of being inadequate, of being rejected. The fear that had kept his own internal door locked for so long. He wasn't just asking for kissing lessons. He was asking for reassurance, in the only way he knew how. He was asking me, his safest person, to tell him he wasn't broken. And how could I say no to that? How could I, the secret keeper of his vulnerabilities, the guardian of his sleeping form, deny him this? So I took a breath, a long, slow one, and I let go. I let go of the pride, of the hurt, of the years of carefully constructed defenses. I let go of the fear of what would come after. I decided, in that moment, to just live inside the moment itself, without a thought for the consequences. I was tired of living on the shore. I was going to dive. Okay, I said. The word was a whisper, but it landed in the space between us with the force of a thunderclap. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, of relief, of something else I couldn't name. He hadn't actually expected me to agree. He had braced himself for refusal. Okay, he repeated, his voice barely audible. I nodded, a single, decisive dip of my chin. Okay, for practice. A slow smile spread across his face, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The tension was still there, a tightly coiled spring. He shifted on the couch, closing the small gap that remained between us. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. The sounds of the movie's score faded into a dull, distant thrum. All I could hear was the frantic drumming of my own blood in my ears. He raised a hand, slowly, hesitantly, and cupped my jaw. His palm was warm, slightly rough. My skin ignited at his touch. It was the first time he had ever touched me like this, with such clear, unambiguous intent. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. So, what's the first lesson? He murmured, his thumb stroking softly along my jawline. A simple, devastating gesture. I think, I said, my voice shaking slightly. The first lesson is to stop talking. And then he leaned in, and the world dissolved. Before I could even begin to process the cataclysm of that first kiss, before I could catalog the sensations or analyze the implications, it's essential to rewind. To understand the weight of that moment on the couch, you have to understand the foundation upon which it was built. You have to understand the architecture of our friendship, the specific blend of history and happenstance that made Ethan the one person who could make such an impossible request, and me the one person who would be foolish enough to grant it. Our story didn't begin with a storm. It began with the mundane, with the institutional beige of a college dormitory hallway. We were freshmen, thrown together by a housing algorithm that had, in its infinite, unfeeling wisdom, placed our single rooms directly across from each other. I was Leo, the quiet, observant kid from a small town, armed with an old film camera and a profound sense of being out of my depth. He was Ethan, the gregarious former high school quarterback from a bustling suburb, who seemed to navigate this new world with an effortless, infuriating grace. He was the first person I met. I was struggling to drag a ridiculously oversized box labeled books into my room when it slipped from my sweaty grasp, landing on my foot with a dull, painful thud. I let out a string of curses that were both quiet and intensely heartfelt. A laugh echoed from across the hall. I looked up to see him leaning against his doorframe, a lopsided, amused grin on his face. He was all bright eyes and easy confidence, dressed in a university sweatshirt that already looked like it belonged on him. I, in my wrinkled, ill-fitting t-shirt, felt like an imposter. Need a hand with that? He asked, the grin never wavering. I wanted to say no. My pride, a small, stubborn thing, wanted to insist on my own self-sufficiency. But my throbbing foot had other ideas. Please, I mumbled, and that was it. That was the beginning. He didn't just help me with the box. He helped me unpack, assemble my cheap particle board desk, and hang the one poster I owned, all while keeping up a running commentary of jokes, observations, and questions. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of friendly energy that pulled me from my shell before I even had a chance to retreat into it. He learned more about me in 2 hours than most people had in years. He wasn't interrogating me. He was just interested. genuinely, boundlessly interested. He found my camera fascinating, not just as an object, but as a concept. "So you just walk around, looking for things?" he'd asked, picking it up with a reverence that surprised me. "You see the world differently, huh?" It was the first time anyone had articulated my own internal experience so simply, so accurately. He saw me, not as the quiet, weird kid, but as an artist, a person with a unique perspective. He gave me a label that felt like a gift. Our friendship solidified in the crucible of late-night study sessions, shared pizzas, and the mutual misery of freshman-level calculus. We were opposites in almost every way. He was all kinetic energy, I was all potential. He processed his thoughts by talking them out, filling a room with words until he found the ones that fit. I processed my thoughts in silence, arranging them and rearranging them in my head until they formed a coherent picture. He was the sun, and I was the moon, content to orbit and reflect his light. But the opposition wasn't a source of friction, it was a source of balance. He drew me out into the world, introducing me to people, pulling me to parties I would have otherwise avoided. I, in turn, provided him with a quiet space, a harbor where he didn't have to perform. He could come into my room, flop onto my bed, and just be silent for an hour, and I would understand that he wasn't being rude. He was recharging. The moment I knew my feelings for him had crossed a line from friendship into something deeper, something more complicated and dangerous, is etched into my memory with the clarity of a perfectly focused photograph. It was sophomore year. We had decided to take a spontaneous road trip to the coast for the weekend, a foolish, ill-planned adventure in his beat-up old car. We had driven for hours, singing along badly to the radio, surviving on gas station coffee and bags of stale chips. We arrived at the ocean just as the sun was setting. We kicked off our shoes and ran down to the water's edge. The sky was on fire, a riot of orange, pink, and deep purple. Ethan, whooping with joy, ran straight into the surf, splashing in the shallow, freezing water like a little kid. I stayed back on the sand, my camera in my hand. I was watching him, a dark silhouette against the brilliant, dying light. The waves crashed around his ankles, the spray catching the last rays of the sun, creating a halo of gold around him. He turned back to look at me, a wide, pure, uncomplicated smile of pure happiness on his face. He shouted my name, his voice carried away by the wind and the roar of the ocean, but I saw it on his lips. And in that instant, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just friendship I felt. It was a profound, aching love, so intense it felt like a physical blow. It was the kind of love that poets write about, the kind that can build cities and start wars. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. I lifted my camera and took the picture. I knew, even then, that I was trying to capture a moment that was already gone, the last moment of our simple, uncomplicated friendship. From that point on, everything would be viewed through the lens of this new, secret knowledge. I never showed him that photograph. It remains in a box in my darkroom, a private relic. It was the first of many secret archives. I learned to be a very good actor. I became the supportive friend, the confidant, the platonic brother. I listened to him talk about the girls he was dating, offering advice that was both genuine and subtly self-sabotaging. I celebrated his triumphs and mourned his minor defeats, all from the safe, prescribed distance of the friend zone, a zone I had meticulously built around myself for my own protection. It was a lonely existence, but it was sustainable. The thought of risking our friendship, of losing him entirely, was so unbearable that it made the daily ache of my unspoken love seem like a small price to pay. He was the sun in my sky, and I would rather be a distant planet in his orbit than be cast out into the cold, empty darkness. So when he came to me, broken and hollowed out after his breakup with Sarah, a part of me recognized the landscape. I had been navigating the terrain of heartbreak in his name for years. The difference was, this time, he was turning to me, and only me, for comfort. The nightly rituals, the shared bed, the shrinking space between us, it was all a dangerous, intoxicating dance on the edge of a cliff. I knew I should have stepped back, but I was mesmerized by the view. I told myself I was just being a good friend. But deep down, I knew I was being selfish. I was taking advantage of his vulnerability to get a taste of the intimacy I craved. Each night I lay beside him was a stolen moment, a crime of opportunity for which I knew I would eventually have to pay the price. Which leads us back, inexorably, to the kiss. His lips were softer than I had imagined, and a little hesitant at first. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was questioning, tentative. It was the physical manifestation of his whispered proposition. A test. A data-gathering exercise. My mind was screaming at me to give him notes, to play the part he had assigned me, the part of the detached, objective observer. Too hesitant, I could say. More pressure. Angle your head a bit more to the left. The script was right there, a lifeline back to the safety of our constructed reality. But my body, my traitorous, honest body, had other ideas. The moment his lips touched mine, years of pent-up longing, of carefully suppressed desire, erupted within me. It was like a dam breaking. I didn't think. I just felt. My hand, which had been resting awkwardly on the couch cushion, came up to cup the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at his nape. I pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, answering his tentative question with a definitive statement. It was a kiss that said, "I'm not practicing." It was a kiss that said, "I have been waiting for this my entire life." It was a confession, a prayer, a declaration of war on the quiet, safe world we had inhabited. He responded instantly. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a sudden, answering fire. His hand on my jaw tightened, his thumb pressing into my skin. His other arm came around my back, pulling me flush against him until there was no space, no air, no doubt left between us. The kiss became something else entirely. It was no longer a test, it was a conversation. A frantic, desperate conversation that had been waiting years to happen. It was messy and hungry and full of a raw, desperate need that I recognized because it mirrored my own. We were two starving people who had just been handed a feast. The practice was over before it had even begun. This was real. Frighteningly, beautifully, irrevocably real. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. The blue light of the television had long since given way to the black screen of a dormant menu. The only light in the room was the faint, ambient glow from the city outside my window. I could feel his breath on my face, warm and unsteady. I kept my eyes closed, terrified of what I would see in his if I opened them. Had I gone too far? Had I misread everything? Had I just destroyed the most important relationship in my life for a few moments of selfish, glorious indulgence? The silence stretched on, thick and heavy with unspoken words. The comfortable silence we once shared had been replaced by this new, charged version. Every second that passed was another brick in the wall of my rising panic. He was going to pull away. He was going to laugh awkwardly and make a joke, trying to put the genie back in the bottle. He was going to get up and walk to his room, closing the door behind him, and this time, it would be locked for good. I braced myself for the impact, for the inevitable rejection. But he didn't pull away. He didn't speak. He just shifted slightly, and I felt his lips press gently against my forehead. It was a gesture of such profound, unexpected tenderness that it undid me completely. It wasn't a kiss of passion or of practice. It was a kiss of comfort, of reassurance, of apology, of something so deeply intimate it had no name. I felt a single, hot tear escape from under my closed eyelid and trace a path down my temple. He didn't say anything. He just wiped it away with his thumb, his touch as gentle as a whisper. "So," he finally said, his voice a low, rough murmur against my skin. "Notes." I let out a shaky, half-strangled laugh that was dangerously close to a sob. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me, his own eyes dark and wide and full of a terrifying, beautiful confusion. The mask of the confident consultant, of the joking friend, was gone. I was seeing the real Ethan, the one from the photograph on the beach, the one who lived behind the locked door. And he was just as scared as I was. "No notes," I whispered. "No notes at all." That should have been the start of everything. It should have been the moment the dam broke and all the truths came rushing out, clearing the way for a new landscape. But that's not how fear works. Fear doesn't build bridges, it rebuilds walls, often stronger and higher than before. The morning after the kiss, or, as my mind morbidly termed it, the experiment, the atmosphere in the apartment was thick with a new, brittle tension. The easy, comfortable silence we had cultivated over years was gone, replaced by a self-conscious quiet that felt like holding your breath underwater. I woke up on the couch, a blanket I didn't remember pulling over myself tucked around my shoulders. Ethan was already gone. A note on the kitchen counter, a rare and formal communication between us, simply said, "Early meeting. See you tonight." The handwriting was rushed. All day, I was a wreck. I couldn't focus. I paced the apartment, replaying the kiss over and over in my mind, analyzing it from every possible angle, like a detective examining a piece of crucial, contradictory evidence. There was the kiss itself, the passionate, undeniable connection that had flared between us. But then there was his final question. Notes? Was it a joke? A desperate attempt to revert to the safety of the practice scenario? Or was it his clumsy way of asking, what was that? What are we? And what about the kiss on the forehead? That tender, non-sexual gesture felt more intimate and confusing than the make-out session that preceded it. It was a data point that didn't fit any of my hypotheses. I was lost in a fog of my own making, and the silence from his end was the fog machine, pumping out more uncertainty with every passing hour. When he came home that evening, the awkwardness solidified. He walked in, dropped his keys in the bowl with the same finality as the night of his breakup, and avoided my eyes. "Hey," he said to a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "Long day." He went straight to the fridge, creating a physical barrier between us. The easy flow of our shared space was gone. Now there were obstacles, invisible walls we were both suddenly expert at navigating. I tried to act normal, to fall back on our old rhythms. "Want to order some food? Watch a movie?" I asked, the words sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. "Nah, I'm beat," he said, grabbing a bottle of water. "Think I'm just going to crash early." And with that, he retreated to his room and closed the door. The soft click was a gunshot in the silence. He didn't mean crash in his own bed. He meant it as a statement of retreat. He was withdrawing to his own territory, re-establishing the border that we had so thoroughly obliterated the night before. There was no sleepy look of invitation, no unspoken request for me to follow. The ritual was broken. I spent that night on the couch, not sleeping, just listening to the silence from his room, a silence that felt like a judgment. The warmth and comfort I had found in his bed for months was gone, replaced by a cold, lonely ache that was far worse than anything I had felt before. Before, I had been lonely for something I'd never had. Now, I was lonely for something that had been given and then immediately taken away. This went on for 3 agonizing days. We were ghosts haunting the same apartment, moving through the same spaces, but never truly connecting. Our conversations were reduced to logistical necessities. "Did you take out the trash? I'm heading out. Need anything?" The casual touches that had become so frequent, the hand on the back, the shoulder squeeze, vanished completely. We were like 2 magnets that had been flipped, repelling each other with the same force that had once drawn us together. He was building his walls back up, brick by painful brick, and I was too hurt and too confused to try and stop him. My mind cycled through a Rolodex of self-recrimination. I had pushed too hard. I had read too much into it. I had taken his moment of vulnerable, confused need and plastered my own years of longing all over it. I had been greedy, and now I was paying the price. The friendship, the one thing I had sworn to protect, was crumbling, and it was my fault. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was a poison, and I was dying from it. I had to know. I had to understand what had happened, even if the truth was the one I feared the most. That for him, it had all been a terrible, drunken mistake. A momentary lapse in judgment fueled by loneliness and grief. I found him in the living room, staring blankly at the television, the same way we had been that night. It felt like a cruel parody. I turned off the TV. The sudden silence made him jump. He finally looked at me, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the same hollowed-out look he'd had after his breakup. But this time, it was mixed with a deep, profound guilt. He looked like a man who had committed a crime and was just waiting to be caught. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He flinched, then sighed, a long, weary exhalation. He ran a hand through his hair. "Leo, I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" I asked, my heart beginning to hammer. "Sorry for kissing me? Or sorry for ignoring me for the past 3 days?" "Both," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his hands, clasped tightly in his lap. "All of it. It was a mistake." I shouldn't have. I wasn't thinking. I put you in a weird position. I messed everything up. You didn't mess everything up, Ethan, I said, my frustration starting to bubble up, hot and sharp. You're messing it up now. By running. By hiding in your room and pretending it didn't happen. What are you so afraid of? I don't want to lose you, he burst out, his head snapping up, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were wild with panic. Okay, I don't want to lose my best friend. And what we did, that's how you lose people. You cross lines, and you can't go back. And I can't lose you, Leo. You're everything. You're the only person who, he trailed off, his jaw working, unable to finish the sentence. The raw, desperate honesty of his outburst knocked the wind out of me. He wasn't running from me. He was running from the possibility of losing me. In his mind, our friendship and what had happened on the couch were mutually exclusive. He thought he had to choose. And in his fear, he was choosing to sacrifice the new, terrifying possibility to preserve the old, safe reality. He was willing to amputate a limb to save the body. So that's it? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. We just pretend it never happened? We go back to how things were. Is that even possible? I don't know, he said, looking utterly defeated. I hope so. And that's when my hurt curdled into anger. An anger born of love, but anger nonetheless. You hope so? I repeated, my voice rising. You think you can just use me, Ethan? You think you can use my body and my friendship as your personal laboratory to work out your issues, and then just put it all back on the shelf when you're done? Is that what this is? I was gesturing around the room, at the couch, at the space between us. Was I just a convenient, safe option because you were lonely? No, he insisted, shaking his head vehemently. No, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I shot back, stepping closer. Explain it to me. Because I am so confused. You're the one who asked for this. You're the one who started it. And then you act like I committed some kind of crime. You asked me to help you practice, but you won't even tell me who you're practicing for. Is there someone else? Just tell me. Just be honest with me for once. There is no one else, he yelled, getting to his feet. So we were standing face to face, the air crackling between us. There's no one. That's the whole point. I don't know what I'm doing, Leo. I don't know what I'm feeling. My whole life just blew up, and you were the one stable thing, the one person who was just there. And then I started feeling things I shouldn't feel. Things that don't make any sense. What things? I pressed, my voice dropping again, insistent. What things shouldn't you feel? He stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His face was a battlefield of warring emotions, fear, confusion, frustration, and something else, something I had been waiting a decade to see. Vulnerability. Complete, terrifying vulnerability. When I was with Sarah, he began, his voice strained, and things were bad. I would just think about coming home. To this apartment. To you. I would think about just sitting here, in the quiet, and how that felt more real, more like home, than anything I had with her. And after she was gone, and you were just there for me, lying next to me in the dark, I stopped feeling so lonely, and I started needing it. Needing you there. And it scared the hell out of me. He took a ragged breath. And the other night, on the couch, I just looked at you. And I wanted to. I just wanted to kiss you. Not for practice. Not for anyone else. Just for me. And that scared me more than anything. Because it's you. And you're my best friend. And I'm not. I'm not supposed to feel this way about you. The confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, shimmering thing. He had finally said it. He had finally admitted the truth, not just to me, but to himself. He wasn't straight. He wasn't confused about how to kiss girls. He was confused about why the only person he wanted to kiss was his male best friend. All the illogical actions, the self-sabotage, the practice excuse, it was all a clumsy, desperate attempt to make sense of a feeling that threatened his entire understanding of who he was. I looked at him, at this beautiful, brilliant, hopelessly confused man who had been my entire world for so long. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a wave of profound, overwhelming love and empathy. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who had been handed a map that led to a place he never expected to go, and he was terrified of taking the first step. I reached out and took his hand. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. His fingers were cold. I laced mine with his. Hey, I said softly, my voice the anchor I had been for him so many times before. Look at me. He slowly raised his eyes to mine. It's okay to be scared, I said. I'm scared too. His thumb brushed against the back of my hand, a tentative, questioning touch. You're not supposed to feel anything, Ethan. I continued, my voice thick with emotion. You just feel. And whatever you're feeling, it's okay. We can figure it out. Together. A tear rolled down his cheek, the second one I had ever seen him shed. He didn't wipe it away. He just stood there, holding my hand, letting me see the full extent of his broken, beautiful heart. But what if I mess it up, he whispered. What if I hurt you? You will, I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. And I'll probably hurt you. That's what people do. But we'll fix it. We'll talk. We won't hide in our rooms. We won't build walls. I squeezed his hand. That's the only rule. No more locked doors. He looked at our joined hands, then back at my face. A glimmer of something new appeared in his eyes, something that wasn't fear or confusion. It was hope, a tiny, fragile seedling of hope pushing its way through the rubble. Okay, he whispered, the same word I had said to him on the couch, but this time it held a different weight. It wasn't a word of acquiescence. It was a word of promise. Okay, no more locked doors. The aftermath of that confrontation wasn't a sudden, magical fix. There were no cinematic declarations of love under a starry sky. Instead, it was the beginning of a slow, careful, and sometimes clumsy process of rebuilding. We didn't fall back into the old rhythm, nor did we immediately create a new one. We entered a period of quiet negotiation, of learning a new language together. The first step was simply acknowledging the truth in the light of day. The conversation had cracked the foundation of his denial, and now, we had to decide what to build in its place. That night, for the first time in almost a week, he didn't retreat to his room. We ordered food, and we sat on the floor of the living room, eating out of cartons like we had 100 times before. But it was different. The silence was no longer tense or awkward. It was spacious. It was a place where thoughts could form without the pressure of being spoken immediately. When it was time for bed, a new, unspoken question hung in the air. He looked at his closed bedroom door, then at me. I saw the flicker of his old fear, the instinct to retreat to safety. I just held his gaze, my expression neutral, giving him the space to make a choice. I wasn't going to push. I wasn't going to follow. The next move had to be his, an intentional act, not a regression to a comfortable habit. He took a deep breath, the kind you take before a plunge, and walked not to his room, but to the linen closet. He pulled out a spare pillow and a blanket. He walked back to the couch, our battlefield, our confessional, and placed them at the opposite end from where I usually sat. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. He was proposing a new arrangement. Together, but separate. Proximity without the loaded intimacy of a shared bed. It was a compromise. It was a start. I nodded, and a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. He wasn't running away. He was trying to find a way to stay. Those first few weeks were a delicate dance. We talked, more than we ever had before, about things that actually mattered. He talked about his fears, his confusion, the pressure he'd always felt to be a certain kind of man, the kind who had a steady job, a pretty girlfriend, and a life that fit neatly into a pre-approved template. He admitted that his feelings for me weren't new, not really. They were a low hum he'd been consciously ignoring for years, a piece of emotional data that didn't fit his self-image, so he'd filed it away under unexplained anomaly. My role shifted from secret admirer to something more akin to a guide. I was the one who had been living in this emotional landscape for years. I knew its terrain. I could help him navigate it. I listened, I validated his feelings, and most importantly, I gave him time. I never pushed for labels. I never asked, "What are we?" I knew that the answer to that question couldn't be found in words, not yet. It had to be built, action by action, choice by choice. Our physical intimacy rebooted from scratch. It started not with kisses, but with hands. A deliberate, conscious choice to hold hands while we were watching a movie on the couch. The first time he reached for my hand, his movements were hesitant, almost shy. I met him halfway, my fingers lacing through his. It felt more honest, more real, than any of the unconscious cuddling we had done before. This wasn't an accident of sleep. This was a choice. This was a statement. We were two people, awake and aware, choosing to be connected. We would sit like that for hours, the simple, solid pressure of his hand in mine a constant, reassuring presence. It was a silent conversation, a confirmation that we were in this together. The couch became our new territory. His bed was still his own, a space he needed to reclaim for himself, to learn to sleep alone in again without it feeling like a punishment. The couch was neutral ground, a place where we could redefine our relationship. One night, as a movie we were barely watching played on, he leaned his head against my shoulder. It was the same gesture he had made countless times before, but now it was freighted with new meaning. I didn't tense up. I didn't overthink it. I just relaxed into it, resting my own head against his. It felt like coming home. We weren't practicing. We were just being. The first kiss after our confrontation happened about a month later. It was as quiet and undramatic as the first one had been chaotic. We were in the kitchen, making coffee on a lazy Saturday morning. The sun was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. We were moving around each other in our familiar, easy rhythm. I handed him his favorite mug, and our fingers brushed. He stopped, the mug halfway to the counter, and just looked at me. The sunlight caught the gold in his hair, and the love I felt for him was so strong it was a physical ache in my chest. He must have seen it in my eyes. He put the mug down, very carefully, and stepped into my space. He gently cupped my face in his hands, just as he had that first night. But this time there was no hesitation, no question in his touch. There was just a quiet certainty. "Leo," he said, his voice soft. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It was a slow, tender kiss, full of a warmth that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with affection. It was a kiss that tasted like coffee and morning sunlight. It was a kiss that said, "I see you." It was a kiss that said, "Thank you." It was a kiss that said, "I'm here. I'm staying." When he pulled back, he was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "Good morning," he said, as if we were just starting our day, our life, together. "Good morning," I replied, my heart so full I thought it might burst. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. We built our new relationship out of small, intentional moments. The shared smiles over breakfast. The way he would now instinctively reach for my hand when we walked down the street. A public declaration I never thought I would have. The quiet evenings spent not in front of the TV, but with me in my darkroom, him watching in fascinated silence as I brought images to life in the chemical baths. He said that watching me work helped him understand me, that he was finally learning to see the world through my eyes, to appreciate the nuances of light and shadow. He was no longer just the subject of my art. He was becoming a part of its creation. One evening, months later, I found him standing in the hallway, looking at his own closed bedroom door with a strange expression on his face. I came up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my chin on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. He leaned back into my embrace, a comfortable, familiar weight. "I was just thinking," he said slowly, "that I don't need this door anymore." He reached out, his hand resting on the doorknob. "My room is in there," he said, gesturing with his head toward my bedroom at the other end of the hall. "With you," my heart did a familiar, happy little flip. That night, for the first time, he didn't sleep on the couch or in his own bed. He slept in mine. And when we woke up the next morning, tangled together in the sunlight, it wasn't an accident or a compromise. It was a destination. We had navigated the storms and the treacherous currents, and we had finally found our harbor. It wasn't a grand, dramatic ending, but a quiet, peaceful beginning. We had learned that love isn't about grand declarations or perfect kisses. It's about the quiet, steady choice to show up, to stay, and to keep all the doors, especially the ones inside your own heart, unlocked. It's about finding the one person in the world you never have to practice for, because with them, you are already, and have always been, real.